The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has defended the government's decision to exclude the heads of Australia's big banks from next week's Jobs and Skills Summit. Invites to the 100-person or so summit, which includes state and territory leaders and representatives from major companies like Qantas and Woolworths, have been limited. Australian Banking Association CEO and former Labor Premier Anna Bligh will represent the banks. She joins us live now. Anna Bligh, thanks so much for your time. What do the banks actually want to achieve at the summit?
Australian banks see the summit as a great opportunity at the beginning of a new term of a new government for the whole country to think about the economy that we want for the next decade and beyond, and how do we make sure we're equipped for all the opportunities ahead of us. Have we got the right skills? Have we got the right regulatory settings? Have we got the right payment systems? How do we make sure we can land this in a way that delivers growth, prosperity, and increases equality, not reduces it?
That's a fairly big remit. In order for the Jobs and Skills Summit to be a success, the government is trying to kind of manage expectations and limit the scope. So do you think all those issues are going to be addressed?
Well, I think it's really important that we see this summit as the launch of a process, not the landing of it. 2 days is not going to be enough to solve some of the bigger issues. And that's why I think it's a great idea that the government is seeing this summit as the beginning of a process that will see a white paper issued to the entire Australian community. There will be public submissions into that process. When you want to make big changes and you want to think about big ideas, a white paper process, it sounds very boring, Laura J, but it's actually one of the most important ways that I think governments of all persuasions have really gone about thinking of big ideas and big shifts in public policy. So the summit is really the beginning of a process. It's an important beginning. I think we're all going to hear a lot of interesting ideas, but it's really what comes beyond that I think is the main game.
You have unique perspective because you're in your position that you are in now. You've also been a state premier. My one reservation is that Kevin Rudd also had a summit like this and the outcomes were not acted upon and it was full of corporate speak.
Look, I think you can only judge what comes out of this summit and what happens next by what actually happens. Everything I'm hearing from not only the government, but there's a very wide cross-section of sectors of the economy that are attending, whether it's unions, academics, state leaders, corporate Australia, industry and peak bodies, non-government agencies. I think everybody's going with a sense of a very open mind, a lot of goodwill, and hopefully really trying to find consensus. We're not going to agree on everything. We're not going to solve every issue in 48 hours. I think let's be realistic. Beginning of a process that I think comes from a place of a very strong commitment to getting it right, a lot of goodwill from all the players, and I think also, if you think about it in comparison to perhaps a previous summit, a much more focused and narrower agenda. It's not trying to boil the ocean. True. It's saying, let's focus on the economy, let's focus on the skills that we need for the jobs of the future. And that's a really important topic. We are in a moment of unprecedented disruption and change. So let's take one breath, take a step outside and say, well, how do we really get that right? Because if we get it right, I think it can create jobs and growth and prosperity and wealth for the country and for the people and families who make up Australia. If we get it wrong, we could actually see inequality get worse, and that has a very bad impact on social cohesion and the quality of life for every one of us. So
Indeed.
Having a really red-hot go at getting it right, I think really matters.
Well, this is not a comment on your negotiating or advocacy skills, but why are the big four bosses of the banks not invited and the superannuation bosses are? Can you explain that?
Well, I think anybody who's ever done an invitation list for a big family event or a wedding knows that 100 spots is not very many, and you've got to make some good some big calls. Look, this was an invitation list done by the government. I think they've got a very good cross-section of the Australian community. I also, as I said, think it's really important to remember this is the beginning, not the end of this process. The Treasurer has recently met with all of the CEOs of the Australian Banking Association in our first meeting after the election. He's also met individually with each of the major bank CEOs, and I anticipate that will happen again in the future. What we are going to see, I think, is post the summit, lots of companies, including large and small banks, responding to the white paper, putting up their experiences, their ideas, and out of all of that, I hope we get something that's a very significant move forward for the country.
And Bligh, when you get around this table, what is your instruction or what is your advocacy when it comes to more migrants to fill those skills shortages, or even smaller ideas, but important ideas like letting pensioners work more before their payments are penalised?
Well, I think there are very few parts of the economy that are experiencing as rapid change in the skills needed than you're seeing in banking at the moment. Just over the last sort of 3 to 5 years, we now have a situation where Australian banks employ more data analysts, software engineers, coders than they employ clerical staff or tellers. So Australian banks are becoming tech companies in their own right, almost. They are no different than the companies that they are banking. They see the same thing happening in the businesses that they support through lending and other banking services. So a very big focus on skills, a more short-term focus on labour shortage. The skills issue in the longer term is about, I think, staring very deeply into the connection between our schooling system, our training and education system beyond school, but also our workplaces. What is the role of corporate Australia in skilling and reskilling as the economy shifts? Migration's part of that.
Indeed.
But doing it, some of the hard yards ourselves has got to be part of it as well.
Yeah, look, it'll be a really interesting summit. Before I let you go, the unions have flagged, Lisa McManus, that perhaps they should get a seat on the RBA board. Would that worry you?
Look, the RBA is now, or the Reserve Bank is currently the subject of a comprehensive review by the government, including who should be on the board. I think we'll leave it to the review to have a look at that and see what they come up with.
Anna Bligh, good to talk to you. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.